Welcome to our Human Flourishing Program webinar called How Forgiveness Can Heal Communities, Learning about Forgiveness Campaigns. And we are delighted to have you with us today. My name is Kate Jackson-Meyer, and I'm a research associate at the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard. And we are very much looking forward to spending the next hour and a half with you all discussing forgiveness campaigns. We have a great lineup, and I know we are all eager to get started. So I will set the stage by telling you more about the Human Flourishing Program and the global forgiveness movement. And then I will briefly introduce some ideas around forgiveness and forgiveness campaigns. And then I will introduce our speakers who will each speak for a little bit. And then in the last third of our time together, we'll have a roundtable with the panelists, and you will have an opportunity to ask questions at that time. Please submit questions using the question and answer feature. So let's go ahead and get started. So for those of you that are new to the Human Flourishing Program, the Human Flourishing Program is an interdisciplinary program at Harvard that researchers and promotes flourishing. And we are directed by Professor Tyler Vanderweel, the John L. Loeb and Francis Leham Loeb Professor of Epidemiology at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. The program is organized around Professor Vanderweel's holistic vision of human flourishing, represented in his Flourishing Survey, which is on the screen. This vision includes typical notions of flourishing, like happiness and life satisfaction and mental and physical health, as well as deep probing questions around meaning and purpose, character and virtue, and close social relationships. Because of this holistic vision of flourishing, the Human Flourishing Program recognizes the importance of forgiveness. Hurts and forgiveness are part of any relationship, short-term, long-term, ongoing, familial, romantic, and work-related. And forgiveness is a tool in our toolkit that allows us to navigate those relationships. With generous funding from Bansal Philanthropies and the Current Family Foundation, we have recently launched the Global Forgiveness Movement, which uses evidence-based resources to make the world a more loving and forgiving place. The Global Forgiveness Movement is sponsoring this webinar, and we look forward to sharing more with you this afternoon about what we have going on. So you can use the QR code on the screen to go to our webpage, where you can join our email list and check out our upcoming events. So today we're here to talk about forgiveness. So what do we mean when we're talking about forgiveness? Forgiveness is replacing ill will with goodwill to those who have wronged us. This means desiring the flourishing of the offender. Forgiveness is distinct from reconciliation. In reconciliation, a relationship is repaired, two people come together. Forgiveness is a letting go of the hurt. From that, reconciliation may follow, but it may not. Not all relationships should be reconciled. Some are toxic, some need boundaries. So forgiveness is distinct from reconciliation. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. And forgiveness is compatible with justice, accountability, and truth. For many, forgiveness is the first step on the road towards justice. We see forgiveness as really requiring a twofold movement: a decision to forgive, and then replacing negative emotions towards the offender with more positive ones. Our research shows that forgiveness is good for individual and communal health, and we'll be talking more about that research today. We are really focused on the REACH model of forgiveness to help people achieve forgiveness. And the REACH model was developed by the forgiveness pioneer, psychologist Everett Worthington, and we're so lucky to have him with us today, and we'll be hearing from him in a few moments. The REACH model goes through different steps to help people to achieve emotional forgiveness. The R encourages people to recall the interpersonal hurt that they experienced and the emotions associated with it. And then with this model, the individual tries to empathize with the offender. After that, they can explore the idea that forgiveness can be seen as an altruistic gift to the offender. Following that, they make a voluntary commitment to forgive. And then they seek to hold on to or maintain forgiveness through difficult times, such as when an experience comes up where they feel anger towards that person or a hurt comes up that reminds them of that. The Reach Forgiveness model is one of the most widely tested models of forgiveness. So we find it to be incredibly powerful, and we're very excited to tell you about ways where you can use this model for forgiveness. Worthington has created a few-hour, 12-lesson do-it-yourself Reach Forgiveness workbook that we use, and we'll be talking more about that and the research around it later. So from understanding forgiveness, then we move to forgiveness campaigns. So what are forgiveness campaigns? Forgiveness campaigns are community-level initiatives to encourage a deep dive into forgiveness over a specified period of time. The goal of the campaigns is to increase awareness about forgiveness and promote engagement with forgiveness by using a collection of tools and methods that are suitable to the communities where the campaigns are taking place. Campaigns can include forgiveness groups, hosting talks and speakers, book discussions, sermons on forgiveness for religious institutions, social media challenges, and more. And we are very lucky that we have a fantastic group of speakers who will help us better understand forgiveness and forgiveness campaigns and how you can implement them in your community. So today, we'll first be hearing from Richard Cowden, who will talk about the Human Flourishing Program's research on forgiveness. Richard is a social personality psychologist and research scientist with the Human Flourishing Program and in the Department of Epidemiology at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. Much of his research focuses on different types of forgiveness and their implications for well-being, some of which he will be sharing today. Then we will be hearing from Professor Everett Worthington, who will talk to us about his research and experiences with forgiveness campaigns. Professor Worthington is Commonwealth's Professor Emeritus since his retirement from Virginia Commonwealth University. His research and writing focus on forgiveness and other virtues, religion and spirituality, and issues related to marriage and family. His mission is to help individuals, every heart, couples and families, every home, and even communities and countries, every homeland, forgive. Everett was counseling couples professionally in the mid-1980s when he first became interested in the concept of forgiveness, and he began studying the topic scientifically in 1990. Since then, he has been a leader in the field of forgiveness research, and we are delighted that he will be with us today. After that, I'll be talking about the Human Flourishing Program's resources for forgiveness groups and forgiveness campaigns. And then Renatha Lollis will talk to us about her own experience with the Human Flourishing Program's forgiveness groups and its applications. Renatha is a graduate of the University of Memphis and has over 25 years of experience in the marketplace, specializing in human resources and talent acquisition. She holds certifications in both life coaching and biblical counseling and has authored the book Surrender, the Forgotten Spiritual Discipline, along with its accompanying workbook published in 2023. Renatha currently serves at Hope's Lantern and Associates in McKinney, Texas, as a spiritual life coach and strategic advisor, providing guidance, strategic advising, and coaching to clients both domestically and internationally. After that, we're going to have time for questions from the panelists. So please use the Q&A function at that time to ask questions. We are very much looking forward to this conversation. So at this time, Richard, I'll hand it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just waiting for my computer to come through here. Well, I'm delighted to be here. I was reminded with the introductions of how I got into research on forgiveness, and This was through meeting Ev somewhat serendipitously about 12 years ago now. So um, uh, it's been a great journey to get involved in this work and see it evolve over time. As Kate mentioned, um, what I'm going to be sharing here is just a little bit of insight into the research that we've been doing at the Human Flourishing Program on forgiveness and its links to flourishing, just to kind of set the stage for part of the conversation that will emerge. So what I'll first focus on is the observational work that we've been doing on forgiveness and flourishing. Um, then I'll touch on some of the forgiveness work that we've started to do in a recently launched study called the Global Flourishing Study, and then transition into a large multi-site randomized control trial that we ran looking at the effectiveness of the Reach Forgiveness workbook that Kate introduced a few moments ago. So just in terms of the background to some of our work on forgiveness and well-being, there is a lot of evidence now linking interpersonal forgiveness with different aspects of well-being. And a lot of this evidence is obviously very good and quite robust. But when we look at these studies, most usually focus on one or a very small number of well-being indicators. So in one recent review that we did, we found that of the 30 studies that we looked at, about 60% focused on a single domain of well-being, usually with just one indicator, such as depression symptoms, for example. And so what we tend to see is a lot more emphasis on the mental health, psychological well-being dimension of well-being, some emphasis on social well-being and other domains as well. But things like physical health indicators seem to be relatively neglected. And even in the studies that have looked at physical health indicators, many of those studies have used correlational kinds of designs where we can't really establish causality. And so one thing that we've tried to do in some of our work is to strengthen the quality of evidence for aspects of well-being that have received less attention. And also just thinking about studies that are focused on certain, a small number or even just one indicator of well-being. We wanted to see if we could help to develop a kind of more holistic and integrative understanding of how forgiveness might be related to well-being. This is quite a dense figure. I won't have a whole lot of time to sort of go into it. But basically what you see here is in the columns to the right, there are 4 studies that we've done using what we call an outcome-wide approach, where we use longitudinal data to examine the effects of forgiveness measured at one point in time on a wide range of outcomes measured at a subsequent point in time. And these studies have a time span between measurement of forgiveness and the outcomes of 1 year to 7 years. These are done with quite large samples. On the far left-hand side, there's just a representative set of outcomes that we've looked at in these different studies. This isn't exhaustive of every single outcome that we've looked at. I would need a few slides to go through that. But it just gives you a sense of sort of the broadest scope that we've tried to apply when looking at associations between forgiveness and different well-being outcomes. In terms of the color coding, green means or represents an association between forgiveness and some outcome that is more favorable. So in the top row for depression symptoms, the green indicates in each of those cases that forgiveness is associated with lower subsequent depression symptoms. And the grading of the green indicates a stronger association. Um, the gray indicates very little evidence of association in that particular sample, and the white indicates that we didn't have data for that particular outcome in that sample. Um, and so even though these are just 4 studies, we can generally sort of get a pattern of how, or get to see a pattern of how forgiveness might be related to different domains of well-being. So we see generally more consistent and stronger associations for things like mental health and psychological well-being, uh, slightly less consistent for and strength or magnitude of associations for social well-being indicators, and then less so for volunteering, character, and here is sort of the weakest evidence for physical health and health behaviors. Um, I don't have time to sort of go into potential explanations for these patterns, but compared to looking at just one or a few indicators of well-being, my hope here is to just illustrate the sort of deeper understanding that we can get about the linkages between forgiveness and different aspects of well-being. Um, So as I mentioned earlier, one other strand of work that we've been undertaking is with the Global Flourishing Study, which is a longitudinal panel study that includes roughly nationally representative samples from uh, more than 20 countries. Um, and in many instances, this study has given us an opportunity to look at population level forgiveness in many different countries. And this is something we've not been able to do much of in the past. So how forgiving is a particular country as a whole? There's one item on forgiveness in that survey, and um, that item is, how often have you forgiven those who've hurt you? Response options are never, rarely, often, or always. And earlier this year, we published 2 studies using these data. One looking at the distribution of forgiveness in each of these countries, um, and then also looking at sociodemographic correlates. So, are there differences in forgiveness based on age, gender, etc.? And then the other study was looking at retrospectively recalled childhood predictors of forgiveness in adulthood. So we asked people about their childhood retrospectively, things like whether they attended religious services, the quality of their relationships with their parents, whether they were abused when they were growing up, etc., etc. I will just focus on the first study here for time's sake. Um, so when we looked at the pooled estimate of people who said they had often or always forgiven those who had hurt them across the studies or across the countries, the 22 countries we looked at in wave one, we found that about 75% of those individuals report that they've often or always forgiven those who've hurt them, ranging from about 41% in Turkey to 92% in Nigeria. But what seems to be potentially more interesting is the 25% who fall in the never or rarely response category, indicating, a non-trivial number of individuals who are sort of struggling with unforgiveness. Um, and then we also looked at, subgroups who reported the lowest forgiveness in the greatest number of countries. And so across those demographic groups. So individuals, aged 18 to 24 years old, they tend to report the lowest forgiveness in 7 countries. Single, never married individuals in 10 countries. Unemployed and looking for a job in 8 countries. Those who never attend religious services in 19 countries, and those with 8 or fewer years of education in 11 countries. So if we take these together, we see that a non-trivial proportion of people in the general population have some unforgiveness to deal with, and we can also see that there may be segments of the population who are in particular need of forgiveness resources. Um, as Kate sort of alluded to, we know now that there is a lot of evidence suggesting that forgiveness interventions are effective and helpful. Um, they're not only helpful in terms of increasing forgiveness, but they also have benefits in terms of improving hope and symptoms of depression and anxiety as well. And as I'll show, other outcomes too. Um, so when we look at you know the proportion of the population in these different countries that may be struggling with unforgiveness and the potential benefits of forgiveness interventions, we might ask the question of, can we create and disseminate resources to help people in the general population, so a broader population of individuals, not just those who are seeking treatment, to support them processing forgiveness. And can we do this, make this relatively accessible and do so at relatively low cost? Some prior studies have attempted to do this using forgiveness workbooks, um, uh, and quite a lot of work has been done on a slightly longer version of the Reach Forgiveness Workbook. Um, but what we were interested in more recently is whether we could, whether we might find evidence of, uh, supporting the utility of a briefer version of that workbook. And so this is what led us to conduct a multi-site waitlist randomized control trial using data from 5 different countries. Um, So I won't go back through the REACH model steps. I just want to highlight that, although this particular study and our global forgiveness movement is sort of centered on the REACH forgiveness model, it isn't the only model of forgiveness that is available, and most forgiveness interventions, particularly Enright's process model, um, have good evidence supporting them and are quite similar in terms of their benefits. So in this randomized control trial, we included about 4,600 adults from Colombia, South Africa, Ukraine. There were 2 different sites in Ukraine, Indonesia, and Hong Kong. And at each of those sites, individuals were randomly assigned to either an immediate treatment condition where they received the workbook, or a condition where they received the workbook after a 2-week delay. And so we measured outcomes at baseline, so before we administered the intervention or the workbook. We also measured outcomes in both groups 2 weeks after the immediate treatment group received the intervention. And then after the delayed treatment group had been assigned the workbook for their 2-week period, we measured the outcomes once more. And we found that 2 weeks after the immediate treatment group had been assigned the workbook, and we compared that group to the delayed treatment group, we found that the immediate treatment group had higher state forgiveness, lower anxiety and depression symptoms, higher hope, and higher levels of overall well-being. We did find some variation in effects across the sites. So in some sites, the effects of the intervention were stronger, some it was weaker. And we did find some evidence of effect maintenance in the immediate treatment group at the 2-week follow-up. So 2 weeks after they had completed the workbook. And most of that, or slightly better evidence of effect maintenance for anxiety and depression symptoms, although it is a little bit difficult to tease apart effect maintenance with a waitlist design because the delayed treatment group receives the intervention as well. So what we can conclude from that study, and obviously many studies before that, is brief interventions like the Reach Forgiveness Workbook can be beneficial to people who are struggling with unforgiveness. And we can disseminate it potentially quite easily and widely through various mechanisms, ranging from clinical settings to religious communities, as well as educational institutions. There is on the right-hand side, there's a picture of the front cover of the Reach Forgiveness Workbook that is on our website, on our Global Forgiveness Movement webpage, and there is a link to that at the bottom below. And I think Kate had also shared a QR code to that. That is an English version of the workbook. It is in a PDF and editable electronically. If you're interested in the same version of the workbook, just in other languages, that is available on the discoverforgiveness.org website, which is also pasted below. So this time I'll turn it back over to Kate, and we'll be hearing next from Dr. Worthington.
Thank you, Richard. It's wonderful to see how interventions can really make such a big difference. And now we'll hand it over to Professor Worthington to tell us about his research and work with forgiveness campaigns.
Well, I'm very glad to be with you, and hopefully my video will come on. I'm glad to be with you and be able to talk with you about forgiveness campaigns. Um, I have been consulted by a number of faith leaders about how to make a forgiveness campaign that would help their organization. So I think I get emails all the time from pastors and leaders within congregations, but I think the first major consultation I got was at John Brown University, in which the university had decided they wanted to help their people throughout the university be kind of more forgiving, if possible. And so I worked with them to design a campus-wide blitz to spend 2 weeks trying to uh, just expose the Christian students on the university campus to uh, raise their awareness about forgiveness. The assumption was that most of them already valued forgiveness, and if we could raise their awareness, they would put that into practice more. So we used these Reach Forgiveness groups in addition to the campaign across the campus to try to see if the people who participated in the groups, if that made a difference. So we randomly assigned people to participate in groups or not, and then measured them. And we found out, of course, that the participation in an intensive 6-hour group helps people forgive. Wow, this is science in action. What a surprise. We did this, we replicated it at Asbury University 3 years later, found the same basic thing, and suddenly I have this cosmic realization that, wait a minute, these campus blitzes are actually helping people forgive. So I was kind of aggravated because the effect sizes for the reach groups in addition weren't as large as I would have liked them to be. And then I realized, oh, that's because everybody is kind of forgiving across the campus. And so I wrote a grant to Fetzer Institute in which I did these interventions, these campaigns or deep dives into forgiveness on 9 different Christian campuses. And at the end of that, I tried to, think about what kind of lessons that could be drawn from this. And I think kind of in this after action review, drew 4 little lessons. One is that we focus much more on raising awareness than we did on helping people forgive. The assumption was, well, they already know how to forgive. I'm not sure that's the best assumption possible. The second was what we found were in the 11 universities that had participated in this, most of the time they selected kind of passive interventions, such as putting teepees on the lunchroom tables, advertising forgiveness. Be aware of forgiveness. Sweatshirts, water bottles, banners that people, on highly traveled routes. But there weren't a lot of active interventions. And so we thought maybe, being a little more active rather than passive would be good. A third thing that we found out from these, I think concluded from these, is that the ones that seemed to work the best were the ones where leaders across the campus were really involved, especially at the level of the presidency or the vice presidency or academic head. Um, and so as if the person out front could really get involved and endorse these and encourage people to participate, that made a big difference. The other leader that made a big difference were enthusiastic lay leaders. Now, these may be some staff people, but they also tended to be student leaders. And if you get a real charismatic student leader that can kind of, sweep people along in their network, that seemed to make a big difference. Well, I said 4 lessons, but actually that's only 3, and that's why I got out of engineering right there. It's that numbers thing. So we realized at the end of this time that I really had only done this with Christian groups. I had, in fact, done it with 2 large churches. We didn't publish either of these, but one was a large church in the Philadelphia area, and one was a large church in Australia. And it worked. I think, if anything, even better in a local congregation than it did with university Christian universities. But we decided, because it had been just a Christian, that we would try to expand that and run campaigns with a secular community. And one of the communities that was involved in this was in Colombia at the Universidad del Sinu in Monteria, Colombia. And so we ran a 4-week campaign there. It is a private, non-religious university. We assayed 3,000 people out of the 9,000 students that existed. And so we tried to then see a number of things. We really addressed 3 major research questions. One is, did this produce change across the entire campus? And the answer is yes. The effect sizes were like 0.36 for forgiveness. Now, that means about a third, a little over a third of a standard deviation of change in forgiveness measures. 0.24 in flourishing, so about a quarter of a standard deviation in flourishing, a decrease of 0.18 in depression. And this is important in college students, and about a decrease of 0.10 in anxiety. Now, there were other changes too, like trait forgiveness and forbearance and things like that. So the nice thing about this last study in Columbia is we asked which activities were actually important in helping people change. And we gave people 16 types of activities, and then we asked them which ones they had participated in over the course of a month. So I'll just rip through these very quickly. A 10-item knowledge test. That's a very active thing that they had to learn the answer to 10 important questions about forgiveness. Participate in the brief 3 1/3 hour do-it-yourself workbook in forgiveness, another active and educational. We gave them a choice of participating in a confidential journal, a conversation with a peer counselor, or watching forgiveness-related videos and responding. Watching 3 movies and discussing one of the 3 that were themed in forgiveness. Watching 2 of 4 podcasts that were 1-hour podcasts, again, an educational and kind of a practical how do you forgive type podcast with internationally known forgiveness experts. The other activity was watch the other 2 that you didn't watch at first. 4 animated films were made educating people about forgiveness, and watching the 4 animated films were types of activities. They each took about an hour. And then watch any of 20 1-hour mental health experts talking about things that were related to forgiveness in some way, like stress or mindfulness or forgiveness directly. People could go sit under a forgiveness tree and think about or pray about or do whatever the person that they're trying to forgive, or write about the incident and post it on a forgiveness wall. So we found that participating in more activities was better. There was actually a linear relationship after about 3 activities. 0 to 3 activities, not much effect, but beyond that, it was more activities, more forgiveness, more reduction of depression, more flourishing. And then which activities were the best? I think this is a very useful thing for people planning things. Active activities, not passive ones, are best, of course, but brief things like sitting under a forgiveness tree, praying for somebody, very popular, not very effective. Things that were of moderate time and effort, like completing the do-it-yourself workbook or going to podcasts, those were both popular and effective. Things that took a long time were not very popular. They were very effective if people did them, just not very popular. We ended up learning quite a number of good lessons from this. One, choose a community that is a limited community that is hopefully motivated to learn to forgive or forgive more. 2, try to get engaged leaders involved. That's really crucial. 3, make emphasis on not just awareness, but also education and skill building. 4, active campaigns with mental health goals work well. 5, tailor your intervention to your community. 6, choose interventions or activities that are of moderate time and effort requirements, especially for busy people. And then choose active, not passive activities. Convince people that they will benefit more the more that they work at this, and then use existing groups if possible, not one-off ad hoc groups to promote forgiveness because people already have a loyalty to those groups. Now, we've done these also in churches, and the same principles obtain. So I'm hoping that this gives you some really practical things that you could do if you're thinking of running a campaign in your local university or in your local place of worship. So thank you, and I do appreciate in being with you today. Look forward to the Q&A later.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to learn from you and to learn from all of those insights that you've gained over your years doing this work. So, as Professor Worthington said, if you're thinking about doing a campaign, we can learn from these insights. And so the Human Flourishing Program's Global Forgiveness Movement has built up forgiveness campaign resources that we are sharing with you today, and we're continuing to build them up so that if this is something that you want to bring to your community, we have resources to support you to do that. So the first key resource is the Reach Forgiveness Workbook, evidence-based. If you use the QR code on the screen, you can access it from our website. The first QR code will lead you to the Reach Forgiveness Workbook that has been adapted to be slightly more user-friendly, and it's a fillable PDF. We had a lot of interest from church groups initially, so we have made a version specific to that community. So if you use the second QR code, you will find a version that is user-friendly and adapted for churches with some prayers. We hope to make additional versions in the future that continue to embrace the transcendent power of forgiveness and that speak to particular communities. So these are the first two that we have available now. You can also find them on our Global Forgiveness Movement webpage. If you go there, you can also see them and access them from there. When you're doing the workbook, you will see that it is so engaging. It has opportunities for reflection, to think about forgiveness in your life, to think about forgiving a particular hurt. It has opportunities for education, and then it also has opportunities for experiential exercises. So here's a sample exercise, a movement activity where you put your hands out and you imagine yourself holding the hurt of forgiveness. These are really it's an experiential experience to go through this workbook, and we're just so grateful that Professor Worthington has put together this gift of this workbook that is really, really dynamic. The next resource that we have available for you are forgiveness groups. So the forgiveness groups allow people to work through the Reach Forgiveness Workbook in a group-supported setting. So the way our forgiveness groups work, they're comprised of 6 to 10 participants who work on the workbook individually and then meet to discuss their experiences. We have set it up to have 3 to 4 meetings. So the first meeting is an introduction to forgiveness research, the REACH model, and the forgiveness group. Then participants go away for maybe a week or 2 weeks, so they have that time to work on the first half of the workbook on their own. And then they come together for the second meeting, where we lead a facilitated discussion about the experience of completing the first half of the workbook. Then participants have a break time. Maybe you meet again in a week or 2 weeks, and during that time, they can work on the second half of the workbook. Then we come together and have a facilitated discussion about the experience of completing the second half of the workbook. And then we'll do an optional fourth meeting to debrief if needed. If we're doing a train the trainer group, then we train facilitators. If the group is thinking about how to implement this in their community, we talk about that in the extra meeting, this fourth meeting. And we have found that this forgiveness group builds on those insights that Professor Worthington was talking about. It's active, it's a moderate time commitment. You're working on the workbook, you're meeting. It's not too many meetings, but it's enough meetings to add some accountability, to go through the workbook with a group, to work through it with people that are going through it too. That will it helps to stimulate engagement as well as insights. During the group, we ask people to start with a small hurt. What we're doing is to help people build a forgiveness muscle, and it takes time to strengthen that muscle. So they start on a small hurt, they work through that, and then as time goes on, they could do the workbook again and work on harder and harder hurts to grow that forgiveness muscle. We find that this kind of level of accountability adds to the experience of being able to complete the workbook, as well as just encourage insights between people. In one of our meetings, somebody said, I want to forgive because not forgiving is becoming part of my identity, and I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want that to be part of my identity. Other people in the group, really resonated with that insight. So the group was really an opportunity to talk to each other about insights of going through the workbook. And at the same time, we don't ask people to talk about the specific hurt. It's really an individual process, but they can share insights about what it means to work through the hurt. And we don't expect people to forgive. This is an opportunity for people to make the choice to forgive if they want to work through the reach model to the extent that they feel comfortable. And it just provides a setting to give them the tools that they need to do that. And the group is not a substitute for certified mental health, but it is a very supportive environment to help people. And we see forgiveness groups as being really an important part of a potential forgiveness campaign. So if you're looking to do a forgiveness campaign, we could imagine a community having many forgiveness groups going. So you have a lot of people in forgiveness groups working through the workbook, being able to experience all of these benefits of the workbook and forgiveness. So we can support you if you're looking to host many forgiveness groups. We can lead train the trainer groups, so people can come to our train the trainer group, people from your community, and then they can go on and lead the groups in your community. We have the workbooks that are available online, which you've seen. We have a facilitator manual for facilitators, so to take this and lead it, as well as just some other things to help, some slides, some flyers, so that you could bring forgiveness groups to your community. We also have ways of supporting community-wide participation. So out soon will be our campaign recipe book, and it's a list of ideas and activities, as well as guides to help you bring forgiveness activities to your community. Following the insights of the research, these are active, but with a moderate kind of time investment. And we encourage you to make them specific to your community. So it's a list of different things with guidelines about how to implement them. And then you could choose from them, what would be the most fitting for our community, for our group. And then there are ways to adapt it to your specific community. Certain ideas that we have in this recipe book are a gratitude and forgiveness tree, a forgiveness inspiration wall, a forgiveness dinner, a forgiveness breakfast. We have support to help you lead a children's activity, acting out a story about forgiveness, and we have many other activities as well. If you're thinking of bringing a campaign to your community, you could ask somebody at Human Flourishing to come, and we would be happy to speak to you about forgiveness and our research. And because churches showed some specific interest in this, we have materials for them. We have sermon starters on theological, psychological, and empirical approaches to forgiveness. So for churches that are looking to do a sermon series, this would be helpful. And we also have a Receive Divine Forgiveness workbook that you can find on our Global Forgiveness Movement webpage. And that workbook helps people to work through receiving divine forgiveness. So if you're thinking to yourself, I would really, like to be part of this and I'd like to learn more. We really encourage you to be part of our upcoming Human Flourishing Program Train the Trainer Forgiveness Group. This is a forgiveness group for people who want to learn about our forgiveness group program and the campaign. So if you are thinking, I really might want to bring a campaign to my community, we encourage you to apply to this group. Applications are due by September 5th, and the group will meet 5 times on Zoom in October and November. You'll go through a forgiveness group. You'll learn about facilitating a forgiveness group. You'll learn about implementing a forgiveness campaign. We'll share our resources with you. So it's a really wonderful opportunity to learn more. You can email me if you have questions. My email is on the screen, kjacksonmeyer@fas.harvard.edu. There's a QR code that you can scan to get to the application. This application form is also on our Global Forgiveness Movement webpage. So this is a really just wonderful opportunity to be part of a forgiveness group with an eye towards thinking about how can I bring a forgiveness campaign to my community. And we do believe that the forgiveness groups are a really wonderful way to bring forgiveness to communities. So Renatha was part of our forgiveness group, Train the Trainer group that we did recently, and now she's going to talk to us about her experience.
Thank you so much, Kate. I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about my experience with the forgiveness campaign training and the Train the Trainer group specifically. I sincerely appreciate the work of Professor Worthington because the REACH model makes forgiveness accessible. Part of the challenge for many of us is that we understand and have some knowledge of the benefit of forgiveness, but we don't really know how to do it. And I think that's an assumption that most of us make, that it should sort of be innate. You should just know how to forgive people. But in reality, sometimes the process and the steps that are necessary to sort of walk through that forgiveness process just really will just elude us. We don't quite know where to begin. And again, we can understand the benefits of it, but it is the walking of it out that can sometimes stop us from pursuing it as a real and viable option. Now, for me, I grew up in a Christian family with a mom and dad who raised me in church. So I've always known what forgiveness was and that it is a tenet of the Christian faith. But there have been times where you have an experience that makes forgiveness seem very challenging to address. And I have my own personal story of why forgiveness was important and the impact that it had on me. So when I heard about this program, I was really, really interested in how to help facilitate the process of forgiveness. What I enjoyed about the Train the Trainer opportunity was that it allowed us as folks who would be potentially leading a group to step into the process so that we aren't just providing information or teaching, but we are experiencing the process of forgiveness with the people who are participating in the group. So we're not excluding ourselves, we're not rising up as above folks, but being able to say that I want to exercise my forgiveness muscle as well so that I can be better at this important part of thriving and flourishing. One of the things that I most enjoyed about the book is before we moved into the actual model, there was a time of preparation. And there was a distinction that was made between decisional forgiveness and emotional forgiveness. We can make the decision to forgive, but still have some feelings attached that we don't quite understand how to process through. And the workbook had amazing exercises to sort of drive the point home, to give us some experiential opportunities to see what unforgiveness is actually costing us. And Kate, you actually showed in your presentation my favorite exercise, and that was from lesson 3 with the holding out of your hands as you hold the burden of unforgiveness. And many times we don't think about unforgiveness as a burden. It is sort of a fact of life, it's our experience, it's what we know. But when we understand that when we hold on to something, it absolutely stops us from grasping onto other things. And in this process of walking through the material, it was just laid out so well, and it built up on itself, creating an opportunity for you to be able to make a decision to forgive. There was no mandate to forgive in the process. And as I led my own forgiveness group, that was really, really impactful to the participants, that there was no expectation that you had to forgive at the end of this workbook, but there was this invitation that was constantly extended, giving each person the chance to say, you know what, I think I want to move forward a little bit further in exploring this idea of forgiveness. In my work as a life coach, one of the things that I do every day, all day, is meet with people who feel stuck. And it's really interesting how many people find themselves stuck because of unforgiveness. They don't know how to move forward in securing a healthy relationship. And as we begin to explore what's happened in their life that's stopping them from achieving this goal of finding lasting connection in a relationship, I've found that more times than not, there is a little bit of unforgiveness because of a past hurt from a previous relationship that stops them from being able to move forward into what they really desire. Even in careers, if they find themselves stuck and not able to move past a plateau in their career, there is unforgiveness in a previous experience or having been passed over, or even unforgiveness of themselves because of mistakes that they made earlier in their career. So, being able to take the REACH model of forgiveness and integrate it into the work that I do with clients has really been a huge help in allowing people to move forward. As we extend this opportunity to grow and to become a more forgiving person, it has even further implications. What I'm finding is that when people latch on to forgiveness, they become forgiveness evangelists. They start talking about it in their lives and their experiences because they then begin to feel the benefits that come with becoming a more forgiving person, and they want to share those benefits with other people. So it has this sort of exponential effect that as we begin the process of opening the doors and creating these different channels of forgiveness, that people notice, they see the change. And because we're having these positive experiences because of forgiveness, it then in turn helps us want to expand this and share it with the people that are in our lives. In the group that I had the opportunity to lead, I had a chance to work with people who had different levels of issues that they were forgiving. And each one of them appreciated so much that they didn't have to share their specific areas of forgiveness, that there was no mandate to talk about the thing that they were forgiving. But when we worked through the material together and we talked about how each of the exercises impacted us, about their ability to help us move forward, or even sharing with some of the struggles that we had as it related to working through a particular exercise, I found that the conversations and the support that came from those conversations allowed people to move forward in places where they actually did feel like they didn't know how to get over the hump. But listening to other people's experiences and how they were able to connect with the material and then implement those things in their lives had such an impact on the group. And it was if you had a group of people cheering you on and saying, yes, you can do this, you can do the work, and you can go through the process of becoming a more forgiving person. It was such a great experience. The information that has been shared, you guys made it so easy to be able to facilitate my own group. And I'm looking forward to doing more of these. And just the work in general of teaching people how to walk out and carry out forgiveness. It really is a movement that can have implications that will change the world. I have enjoyed doing this work and being able to implement it into what I do in my life coaching practice, and to now really be able to see the fruit that is coming from it, and watching people be excited about this process. So for any of you who are thinking about doing your own campaigns, I would tell you, if there's a thought in your mind or if God has dropped this into your spirit to move forward, do it. Move forward. Your life and the lives of those who you introduce this information to is going to be better for it. and it really does have the ability to change a community. So thank you to Professor Worthington and for Richard and Kate for being such great forgiveness champions and for creating a space for me to be able to step into this world as a forgiveness champion as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to hear about your experience, Renatha. Now I will ask all of our panelists to get their videos back on so we can have a conversation. This is an opportunity for everyone to be able to ask questions. So you can use the Q&A feature that is there on Zoom to go ahead and ask questions. We will see them there in the chat. So I will get us going with the first question. And just a general question for you, Ev, that has come up in our work on campaigns. We could think about doing campaigns in maybe a broad way or in a deep way. So maybe a broad campaign is trying to engage a lot of people with smaller time commitment exercises, things like that, or maybe going versus a deep campaign, which would be more of a time commitment, perhaps less people, but really, focusing in, having more activities, really trying to get deep into one community. Broader could be very broad. You talked a little bit about this, thinking about, what kind of community together. So could you tell us more about your thoughts about broad versus deep? Maybe they're not in competition with each other. How do you think about those approaches?
Yeah, I would say they're not really in competition. They're just different ideas about who you want to get to. So I really think that campaigns can be public health interventions. If you think about the worldwide epidemic of mental health problems and forgiveness, which doesn't really have a lot of stigma attached to it, like I'm going to a mental health professional to get help for my depression or my narcissistic personality disorder. So this is like a way that you can, make a broad impact on reducing depression, reducing anxiety, producing flourishing, producing more hope, producing a better sense of well-being. So I think broad campaigns are valuable. But if you want to have maximal impact on the individuals participating in this, we know really in many studies, the more time they spend trying seriously to forgive, the more they will forgive and the more that they will reduce their depression and anxiety. So the deep version helps people really engage and spend time on it and have people that are supportive to work with them so that it encourages them to continue to hang in there when the going gets tough.
Thank you. I've learned so much from my colleague Richard, and one of the things that he has said is small interventions have a smaller impact, big interventions, deep interventions have a big impact. So I think that's what I'm hearing you say as well, and maybe thinking about just what communities are equipped to do will help with that. Yes.
I do think that, in the public health sense, communities that if I'd wanted to address the United States, I probably wouldn't have a lot of impact. But what we do is we try to deal with mediating communities, so those are schools and churches and universities and workplaces, and you can run deeper campaigns within each of those. And I think in that way, you impact the whole, spectrum of a larger community.
Thank you. All right, we have a lot of questions going here already, so keep them coming. That's great. We'll get started with some of these here. So there is a question from one of our participants watching. A forgiveness campaign sounds wonderful, but quite often people who would benefit from this aren't interested or willing. Has there been movement or studies on requiring this type of content in schools, prisons, etc.?
I don't want to keep talking, but Bob, the way that I look at forgiveness interventions is that we are now in a second generation of forgiveness interventions. So the first generation, people just put forth an intervention. They said, this is good for anybody who wants to forgive. But really, they gravitated towards specific uses. So Bob Enright, gravitated toward forgiveness therapy. So deep, 20 sessions of individual psychotherapy, but also classroom interventions. So he would do, on the average, 18 hours of classroom intervention. And a meta-analysis on these were just done, in which 9 of his process models were used in classrooms, and they produced an effect size of about 0.66 for the process model. Or a story-based, 9 story-based interventions that Bob and Suzanne Friedman put together had a 0.26 effect. So these are not very efficient interventions, but if I'm changing the life of these kids who didn't have any choice about whether, they were going to be in this forgiveness intervention, you could have had a real strong intervention over the course of a kid's life if they make changes. So, I think, I think there are organizations where forgiveness campaigns are run. People don't have a choice about whether they're going to be in that organization, but they have a choice about whether they're going to engage with the campaign. And many of the people in Colombia did not. They went 0 to 3 activities, and they didn't benefit. The ones who did engage with the campaign, benefited. So yes, these can be offered, but you can't, you shouldn't, I would say, coerce people to participate in the activities.
And
And
I'd
there
like
are, oh,
just
please.
to add, I think that forgiveness, there has to be some intent attached to it, because to Professor Worthington's point, if there is no true desire, compulsion is not going to create a more forgiving person. Each person has to make the decision about participating in it. And I think the idea of creating spaces to teach children how to do this early gives them more opportunity to practice it, to become more forgiving adults. But there does have to be some decision about seeing the value in this in order for people to receive, I believe, the full benefit of the training.
And just one little tidbit with that meta-analysis that was done on using these in classrooms, kids that were 8 years old or younger had an effect size of 0.0. You can't teach kids who are 8 or 7 or 6 to forgive. You can tell them, say you're sorry, tell your brother or sister you forgive them, and you're scaffolding behaviors that will help them later, but you're not really creating forgiveness. But after, at age 9 and greater, then that's when the effects started to kick in, and kids could learn how to forgive from age 9 up through high school.
Related to this, there's a question about having different approaches for different generations. So you've, given some information there. In the resources we have some, specific for kids. But in your experience, have you seen a need or an approach or a way of dealing with different generations?
Richard, you did that study that looked at age differences, with the Global Flourishing study. What did you see from that?
Well, there we found sort of consistent with prior work that people who are older tend to report higher forgiveness. Um, but yeah, in terms of like the actual resources, though, um, yeah, one smaller campaign that I was part of with a local church here, um, you know, older folks seem to like a sort of hard copy of the, say, workbook. They seem to like, be able to touch it and carry it around with them. Um, Whereas others, younger folks, were happier to sort of use the editable PDF. Um, and at this point, we haven't, sort of moved on to like an app or other kinds of more internet-based approaches to make use of the workbook, but that might be necessary for even younger groups. So to my knowledge, this is an area that we need to kind of do more work in to understand what's the best modality of kind of administration of these resources.
For people in the young group like me, uh, that's a joke. Anyway, dealing with the medical system would be a nice target in terms of forgiving people, in that system. Just saying.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think thinking of what people might be needing to forgive is a good segue to another question. How do campaigns or programs avoid pressuring people to forgive? So I'll start. Certainly when you look at the workbook itself, it's very individual. And, at first I thought, oh, is this something that might be problematic? In fact, I see this as an enormous, rich resource of the workbook, that it is very individual. So this is a really personal, this is something that you decide to do personally. There's nothing in the workbook that makes you forgive. You don't have to go and tell anybody you forgave. This is a very individual journey. And at the same time, you can do it in community. And when we're all in community together, strengthening that forgiveness muscle, then we start to see kind of changes happen. So I think part of not pressuring it's not a kind of coercion, kind of pressuring. It's as Renatha said, we've tried to make it an invitation to forgive by offering the education and everything, uh, and the opportunities for engaging in this. I don't know if you all have other thoughts on that.
I think the basic research uses an idea, and this is not really heavy in the workbook, but uses the idea that when we get hurt or offended, we create this sense of injustice, this injustice gap. And a big gap is hard to deal with. A small gap is easy to deal with. But the beauty is we have many ways that are good moral ways to reduce the size of that injustice gap. And forgiveness is just one of those. So we always try to say, forgiveness is your choice. You can turn this over to God. You can seek justice. You can accept and move on. You can forbear. You can, do all kinds of ways besides forgiving. And you can put them together so that if you know, kind of eat away at the size of that gap by, taking this to God, by, seeing justice done, see a person get some natural consequences of what they've done. Uh, And then it gets down to where, oh, I can forgive that. That's not jumping a 20-foot fence like it seemed like before.
Also, the facilitator guide does a really, really good job of informing and facilitators how to assist people in the process without compelling. It is, again, creating that invitation and creating opportunities for people to share their experiences with the process rather than focusing on the forgiveness itself. So, in being able to, discuss the activities using the actual experiences with movement. One of my favorites was another activity that we did with the chairs of having that dialogue between the person who the offender and the person who needs to extend forgiveness, where you actually go back and forth between the chairs and have this dialogue thinking about some of the factors that you may not have ever considered as the offended party. So each of these just creates an opportunity for people to look at forgiveness and to consider it from a different perspective, extending that choice to them to say, you get to decide how you move forward. So the material helps tremendously in making sure that there isn't any compulsion, but again, just that invitation.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Um, all right. So there is a question about theological and psychological approaches to forgiveness and whether or not they're different. So I can start as a theologian. I is how I come to this. And so I think that this theological approach and the psychological are just beautifully complementary. The From a Christian theological perspective, there is this impetus to forgive. Forgiving is about being a disciple. Forgiveness is core to the message of Jesus. But then how do we forgive? What are the mechanics of forgiving? And that's where your work, Professor Worthington, is so powerful and so profound. So people want to forgive, and then you show them this is how to do it. And then, the research that you and the Human Flourishing Program and others have done talking about just the health benefits, that this message of forgiveness that is common to many religions actually has mental and physical health benefits. You can just see how these are just so complementary. Any other panelists have more to add?
I just did a little workbook with the American Association of Christian Counselors, and what I did with that workbook is to look at what basic science teaches us about forgiveness, what intervention science teaches us about forgiveness, and what the church is a Christian organization. So what the church, the Christian church, has taught as practical theology over 2,000 years, and all of those are evidence-based. Uh, in the looking at the clinical practice, when we say that this is an evidence-based practice, that evidence can come from randomized controlled trials, but it can also be a practice-based evidence in which people have used something in practice for years, and then they know that it works for a particular clientele. So that means that we, with a clear conscience in the church, can rely on a lot of the things like praying for the person who hurt us, praying for discernment, praying for God's help. I mean, there are like 10 ways we can pray about forgiveness. And then, we can search the scriptures about this, and we can, look for heroes of forgiveness in Christian history and in, in the church. We can look at how we live in the church with I'm sorry about this, but sometimes difficult to forgive people. And yet we get to practice that in the church community. So there are many practical theology learnings that we have. And they're not opposed to the science of forgiveness at all. In fact, like Kate said, they're very complementary instead of competitive.
As we talk about extending forgiveness or learning to extend forgiveness, one of the things that as I work with my clients, the big thing that I do as a coach is help people understand the WIFM, the what's in it for me. And as we talk about forgiveness, there are so many benefits spiritually and psychologically that come along with forgiveness, and they match up and they mesh so beautifully. If you just from the physiological benefits to the emotional and mental health benefits to the spiritual benefits. When Jesus taught the disciples how to pray in Matthew chapter 6, forgiveness was a large portion of what we call the Lord's Prayer in the Christian church. And the only portion of the Lord's Prayer in the two verses following are the only thing that Jesus actually expanded on from that teaching about prayer was forgiveness. He actually used that as an opportunity to talk about the importance of it as for his disciples and his followers. So being able to understand that with them, that's what's in it for me, and having people connect onto it sort of allows them to grasp the concept and then to see that it isn't about just releasing the person or the offender, but it's about releasing themselves. And they have the full benefit both spiritually and psychologically.
I think one of the things, that I hope, people see is that although we have given most of the illustrations from the Christian religion, each of the major religions values forgiveness and doesn't they don't think about it the same. There are different approaches theologically with the different religions. So, the Judaism really looks at it much more from the offender's standpoint, that when a person offends, they leave the path of God. And what they need to do is to be restored to the path of God. So that process is called teshuva. We translate that usually as repentance. And so the emphasis is quite different. And yet forgiveness is valued, and Yom Kippur is a day of forgiveness, and people point toward that. And so so it's valued in Judaism, it's valued in Islam. God is, one of the 99 names of God is a forgiving God. And and although people may be entitled to justice, because forgiveness is hard, it's seen as something that is greatly rewarded in Islam. And so, again, it's valued and people want to practice it. But we do want to target what we're doing to the audience that we're speaking to. So, if we're in a different religious setting, then we may do different things than we do, in the Christian setting.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the great powers that are shown in the randomized control trial that Richard shared is that trial was done in very different cultural situations, and still the power of the workbook and the power of forgiveness shines through. And then at the same time, it's necessary to have resources that can speak to that transcendent power and with particularity to different communities. And so that's what we're trying to develop here, is something that is broadly applicable, but also that can be adapted to those particularities, which is so important.
So, that workbook is a secular workbook, and it was applied in a secular, in secular settings. But Richard, I know you have been involved in a couple of studies in which you've looked at how do Christians do with that secular workbook? Are they successful, or do they write it off as, no, this is not me?
Yeah, that's a good point, Ev. Yeah, I think we've looked at Christian subpopulations in Indonesia and Colombia, and yeah, we find very similar benefits among those specific populations relative to everybody else who's completed these workbooks. So yeah, doesn't look like they're writing them off just because they are secular. But I think one of your recent meta-analyses in the last few years uh, shows that sometimes having a sort of spiritually aligned or integrated intervention can be beneficial, uh, at least for some aspects of well-being, particularly, let's say, spiritual kinds of outcomes. So there can be value in having a tradition-specific or adapted version, but at least at this point, it doesn't seem absolutely necessary, at least with the work we've done with Christian subpopulations. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out with other religious traditions.
Yeah, we did meta-analyze spiritually accommodated treatments, and we found that the psychological benefits, of spiritually accommodated treatments for religious people are basically the same as for people who are not religious. So they work, they all work. But when you look at spiritual types of outcomes, there's a significant difference between the ones that are matched to the religious population and those that are just secular.
Thank you. And I see a lot of interest in the research itself and specific requests about citations. I will direct you to our Global Forgiveness Movement page again. And there we have a little brief on forgiveness where many of the studies that we've talked about today, you can find them there. So that would be the first place to look. And then there was also a question about the train the trainer, as well as kind of bringing this forward. And I would say, if you're thinking about bringing a campaign or teaching on this topic, we really do think that a forgiveness group is a wonderful way to get started first. And so the Train the Trainer that I put the link in the chat to, that Train the Trainer group, you can apply for that. It's free to be a part of it if you're accepted. And so we would, love to see your application and be able to work with you and share this with you. I can't believe that we're running up on the end of this time here. It's been so wonderful, a really fruitful discussion, and hopefully just the start of a conversation. So I will hand it off to Richard now.
Yes, well, thank you, Kate, for hosting this discussion. And yeah, it has gone very quickly. And sorry, I think we may not have gotten to all the questions in the chat, but feel free to reach out to us if you have further questions and if we can be helpful with anything. Thank you so much, Dr. Worthington and Renatha, for joining us. It was a pleasure to be with you all. And thank you, everybody who attended. We hope you got some value out of this. And as Kate mentioned, do is sort of keep tabs on the Global Forgiveness Movement webpage on our program's website, and be on the lookout for other updates and as this movement continues. So thank you all and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks. Bye.